Changing Futures is a programme which works across Bristol to improve the lives of people experiencing multiple disadvantage. Multiple disadvantage is when someone is experiencing multiple challenges at the same time, which can include homelessness, mental ill health, drug and alcohol use, domestic abuse, and interaction with the criminal justice system. In 2024, Changing Futures spoke to 32 people living in Bristol experiencing multiple disadvantage. Using their words, two Changing Futures staff will be exploring key issues people told us about, their experiences of shame and stigma.
Hi, I'm Daisy.
And I'm Rose. And I think before we start, it's probably important to set the scene and define what we mean when we talk about stigma and shame. So could you go into that a little bit for us?
Yes, so it can be really helpful to understand shame if we think about it in relation to guilt. So guilt, which we might think of as healthy shame, is a feeling of, oh, I did something wrong, I did something bad, there's some learning there, I'll do something different next time. Whereas shame is much more inherently linked to who we are as a person. So when we do something, we're left feeling that we are bad.
I think it's really interesting to think about those two emotions from that perspective. And I guess as we're talking about multiple disadvantage and shame today, we can't really avoid talking about trauma and the prevalence and impact that trauma has. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, you're right. You know, trauma and shame are intrinsically linked, and we know from the people we've spoken to, but also from the evidence and the research in this area, that people experiencing multiple disadvantage, they do experience really high levels of trauma that often starts with childhood.
And I think you're right, and that was such a prevalent theme that came out in the conversations we had with people and was almost this kind of golden thread through a person's life. And can you go into that link then between trauma in childhood and then that feeling of shame as an adult?
Yeah, I think to understand it, it's helpful to think about the young person and how they might need to cope in the world. So if you're left with those really horrible feelings and not being able to cope with those, it's understandable then that somebody might turn to either unhelpful and unhealthy behaviours or drugs and alcohol as a means to cope, and then you can see that just compounds the trauma and the shame and how that person's feeling.
So I think it's pretty safe to say that caring about your physical appearance and how you present to other people in the world is a pretty universal human experience. You know, I'm sure you and I thought about what we were going to wear when we got up today. But I think for someone who experiences multiple disadvantage, it's just so much bigger because it leaves so much scope for people to make kind of snap assumptions or judgments about someone's life. And, you know, a person experiencing multiple disadvantage, they might not have been able to have a shower, they might be sleeping rough, they don't necessarily have access to healthcare, and having those experiences just laid bare for the world to see. And if we think about shame and how shame is that feeling of I'm bad, your physical appearance can kind of compound that feeling of I'm bad inside and also out as well.
Yeah, I hear you. Shall we have a little read of some quotes from some of the people we spoke to?
Yeah.
Simple things, like a haircut, things like that. Makes a change. Yeah. Makes you feel good. Yeah. But no, you don't get new hair stuff or nail stuff. That'd be good. Just makes you feel normal. This is what I wanted again. Yeah, this is how I wanted to feel. You know, this is how I want to be.
So I think what we really heard coming through in those quotes is the kind of transformational power that supporting someone with their physical appearance can have in helping them overcome and move through these feelings of shame.
Yeah, I think it serves as a reminder to be really curious and open-minded as to what people might want to prioritise, even if maybe our initial thoughts are that maybe that's a bit more superfluous. It's really about leaning into what it really means to be person-centred. So in the conversations that we had, the importance of language really came through. Should we start by just taking a moment to read a quote?
Everywhere that tries to help me, they told me I'm too complex and they can't deal with it, which I don't understand. The services will not connect to me. or listen to me. I don't know. I'm confused. The word hurts me. It gives me hurt. Because if they say you're too complex, then that means they're beyond what they're able to do in it. And it doesn't make no sense. It really doesn't make any sense to me. And I've had it from this service and from that service. I've had it from the groups that they have. I've had it from everybody.
You know, it's not rocket science, and for a long time, you know, in the culture in which we work, we've been moving towards this idea of using more trauma-informed language. But I think around this idea of labelling, there may still be a way to go. You know, to take that quote, for example, and this idea of somebody being too complex or a complex case, if we really think about that, it's a human being having, you know, a human experience, right? The complexity exists, but it belongs in the system and how that person is able to interact with the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea of labelling really came out in other ways in the conversations we had with people. People said they felt like they were being made to put in a box by their interactions with services, or they were made to feel like they weren't being grateful for the support they were receiving. How do you think then that us as services, we can reflect on this use of language?
First of all, it's not about beating ourselves up. You know, we work in an industry that's quite fast-paced, and sometimes the intention is just to maybe say something quickly. But actually, if we lean into the labels and the words that we're using, if it doesn't serve the person, then it's there to serve the organisation. It's probably best not to use it, because we know that this can just make somebody feel stigmatised.
So we just spoke there about the language used in services and how that can reinforce feelings of shame. But in the conversations we had with people, interesting things came out also about the processes used in those services, or even about the physical environments of the services themselves. So let's hear a quote about this.
I'm in temporary accommodation now. They say, "Oh, that's brilliant." Is it? Is it really? All I'm doing is I'm sat in a room like this. I can hear everyone's tellies, radios. I can hear the loo next door and the dogs barking all up the street. And I'm just sat here, just in my head like. They put me in temporary accommodation. I told them it wasn't going to work. The guy next door chased me with knives. And the next morning he comes in, smashes my telly on the floor. He stole all my tins of food and my bread. It's fucked up.
It wasn't surprising that in so many conversations, some people did speak about the challenges of living in temporary accommodation. But I wonder if we think about that through the lens of shame, what's that really telling the person, Rose?
Well, I think what it's telling someone is that in a way they don't deserve any better, and that, you know, their dignity and their safety, it doesn't matter. And I think that just kind of goes on to reinforce that feeling of unworthiness that someone might be experiencing. And if we spoke about shame, of that feeling of I am bad, then being in that environment, it's just adding to that and feeling like I'm bad and this is where I belong.
And I think that just really works against trying to enable someone to move on in their recovery. So how can we continue to support people through shame? Well, I think it comes back to two principles. Firstly, we've spoken a lot about wanting to see the whole person, and one way to do that is to commit to and champion working in a multi-agency approach, and in Bristol we call that My Team Around Me. And secondly, if we know that shame breeds in silence, then we need to continue to champion support that allows people to feel safe. So the importance of building relationships, and also the importance of peer roles and lived experience, so that when someone's early on in their recovery, they can say, hey, look, this person looks like me and speaks like me, and they're recovering, which gives hope and opportunity that maybe they can too.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And in this video today, we've only spoken about stigma and shame as a topic, but when we were doing this project, we spoke to 32 people, and all of their experiences that they shared with us are captured in this report. So I'd really encourage anyone listening and watching the video to go away and read the report, because there's so much that we can learn from it and so many brilliant examples of how things can be done differently.